Right now, in the middle of the day, your ceiling is lying to you. It looks solid. It looks still. It looks like it is doing its job. But put your hand flat against the drywall above your head in August and hold it there for 10 seconds. You will feel it. A slow, deep warmth that has nothing to do with your air conditioner and everything to do with what is sitting 2 inches above that drywall. Mass. Thermal mass. Wood and plaster and insulation that has been absorbing heat since 7 in the morning and has no intention of giving it up until 3 o'clock in the morning, when you are lying in bed wondering why your bedroom feels like the inside of a bread oven, even though the thermostat reads 71. This is not a malfunction. This is physics. And the people who built American houses before 1940 understood it completely. The people who built American houses after 1970 decided you should just buy a bigger air conditioner instead. I want to tell you what they knew and what got buried and why your grandfather's house stayed cooler than yours does right now, even though his house had no central air and yours has a brand new carrier unit that cost you $11,000 3 summers ago. The word you need to know is thermal mass, not as a concept, as a physical enemy that lives in your ceiling and attacks you every night from June through September. Here is how it works. Your roof deck, the plywood or board sheathing nailed directly to your rafters, sits in direct sunlight for 8 to 10 hours a day in summer. On a 95-degree afternoon, that roof deck is not 95 degrees. It is 160 degrees, sometimes 170. The shingles on top of it can hit 190. That heat moves downward by radiation, by conduction, by every mechanism physics allows, and it loads itself into every piece of wood and drywall and blown-in insulation between your roof and your bedroom ceiling. By 2 in the afternoon, your ceiling assembly has absorbed enough heat to warm your living space for the next 8 hours, even if the sun disappeared entirely. Your air conditioner is not cooling your house. It is fighting your house. It is fighting a slow-release heat battery that you rebuild from scratch every single day and pay for every single month on your utility bill. The men who built houses in 1910, 1920, and 1930 did not have that problem at the same scale because they built the ceiling differently. Not just the materials, the geometry, the physics of how heat was supposed to move through the structure. My wife's grandmother grew up in a farmhouse outside Hagerstown, Maryland, built in 1908. It was 2 stories with no insulation in the modern sense, no vapor barrier, no spray foam, and no blown-in cellulose. The upstairs bedrooms in that house on a July afternoon were bearable. Not cool by our standards, but bearable. People slept in them. People worked in them. People lived full lives in them without a single BTU of mechanical cooling. I drove out to look at that house 4 years ago because I could not figure out how that was possible. The current owners let me up into the attic. I stood there with a flashlight, and I understood within about 90 seconds why that house worked, and why mine did not. The ceiling in that house was not a ceiling in the way we think of ceilings today. It was a plaster coat over wood lath nailed to the floor, joists of the attic above. The plaster was thick, dense. It had what builders called thermal lag. The heat that entered the top of the assembly in the morning did not finish moving through that plaster until late evening, by which time the sun was gone and the outside air was dropping. The house was venting that stored heat upward and out before it ever had a chance to make the room uncomfortable. Modern drywall has almost none of that lag. It is thin, it is light. It transmits heat quickly in both directions. The heat that hits your roof at 9 in the morning is pushing through your bedroom ceiling by noon. The old plaster slowed that process by 4 to 6 hours. That gap was the difference between sleeping and not sleeping. But the plaster was only part of it. The bigger part was what was happening above the plaster, up in the attic itself, and this is where the real knowledge got lost. In houses built before roughly 1950, the attic was treated as a ventilated, exterior space, not a room, not a storage area, not a sealed cavity stuffed with insulation. An exterior space that happened to have a roof over it. The builders of those houses wanted air moving through that attic constantly, the same way air moves through a covered porch. The attic was supposed to be almost as hot as the outdoor air, because if the attic was hot but moving, the roof deck could shed its heat upward and out before it loaded that heat into the ceiling below. The tools they used to create that movement were simple. Gable vents on both ends of the attic near the peak, sized correctly, never blocked, never painted shut, never filled with the optimistic foam that an energy auditor sprayed in there in 2009 because somebody told him sealing everything would save you money. A ridge opening at the very top let the hottest air escape. Sometimes a continuous soffit opening along the eaves let cooler air enter low and push the hot air out high. The whole system ran on nothing but temperature difference and the basic fact that hot air rises. When that system worked, the attic ran maybe 10 to 15 degrees hotter than the outdoor air. When that system was broken, which describes the attic above your head right now in the majority of American homes, the attic runs 40 to 60 degrees hotter than the outdoor air. The difference between those two numbers is the difference between a house you can live in and a house you are fighting every summer for the rest of your life. I spent a long time trying to understand when and why this changed. The answer is not one decision. It is a slow accumulation of decisions made by people who had financial reasons to make them. In the 1950s and the 1960s, insulation became an industry, not a craft, an industry. Companies that manufactured fiberglass bats and blown-in cellulose needed those products specified in building codes and builder practices, and they were good at getting what they needed. The guidance that emerged from that period told builders to insulate the attic floor heavily, which is correct, and to worry less about attic ventilation because the insulation would do the work. That was not correct, and it was never correct, but it was profitable. In the 1970s, the energy crisis added a new layer: seal everything, tighten the envelope, stop air infiltration. That advice made sense for walls and windows and doors, where you were losing conditioned air you had already paid to cool or heat. It did not make sense for attics, where what you actually needed was for heat to escape. But the distinction got lost in the enthusiasm for sealing, and attic vents started getting treated as leaks to be plugged, rather than as essential mechanical components of a house that had to breathe to function. By the 1980s, the average American attic had more insulation and less ventilation than at any point in the history of residential construction, and the average American cooling bill had risen accordingly. The industry that sold you the insulation and the spray foam and the house wrap did not consider this a problem. The industry that sold you the larger air conditioner did not consider this a problem. The utility company billing you for the electricity to run that air conditioner did not consider this a problem. You were the only one with a problem, and you did not have a name for it because nobody had explained to you what was actually happening above your head. Here is what was happening. Your attic was storing heat, not just passing it through, storing it. The insulation you put on the attic floor to keep heat from coming down into the bedrooms was doing its job. But that same insulation was also preventing the stored heat in the attic from finding any path downward to equalize and release. The attic air had nowhere to go because the vents were sealed or undersized or blocked. The wood of your rafters and sheathing absorbed heat all day with no mechanism for releasing it. And at night, when the outside air cooled down and you wanted your house to shed its stored heat, the attic held it. Day after day, week after week, the thermal load in your attic grew. By the middle of August, it was not a buffer anymore. It was a furnace running around the clock. The old farmhouse outside Hagerstown did not do this because it could not do this. The AIR was always moving. The heat was always escaping. The ceiling below was thick enough to slow the transmission, and by the time the heat had worked its way through the plaster, the attic above it had already vented most of its load, and the night air was doing its work. The house was working with physics instead of against it. Your house is working against physics, and you are paying for that fight every single month. In the second part of this, I am going to show you exactly what the old builders did at the ceiling level, not just the attic level, to interrupt that heat transfer before it ever reached the room below. There is a technique involving the space between your ceiling joists that appears in farmhouse construction records from Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Ohio, going back to the 1880s, and it costs less than $20 to replicate in any house standing today. I'm also going to show you what a contractor named Earl Hostetler in Wooster, Ohio, documented in his personal building journals from 1934, a ceiling detail that dropped the surface temperature of a plaster ceiling by 11 degrees on the hottest afternoon of the year, with no mechanical assistance and no additional insulation. Just geometry and air. Comment below. Tell me what state you are in and how old your house is. Tell me what your upstairs feels like at 9 o'clock at night in July. I want to know what you are dealing with. Earl Hostetler was not a famous man. He was a carpenter and small contractor working out of Wooster, Ohio in the 1920s and the 1930s. He built farmhouses, barns, additions, root cellars. He kept detailed journals of every project he worked on, the kind of journals a man keeps not because he thinks anyone will read them, but because he is trying to solve problems and writing helps him think. His granddaughter donated those journals to the Wayne County Historical Society in 1987. Nobody requested them for decades. I sat with them for 2 afternoons in the summer of 2021, and I have not stopped thinking about what I found. In the journal entry dated August 14, 1934, Hostetler describes finishing the second floor of a farmhouse for a family named Schrock outside Shreve, Ohio. It had been the hottest summer in that county in 20 years. He writes that the family had complained the previous summer that the upstairs bedrooms were unusable after noon. He had been thinking about the problem all winter. What he built that August was not complicated, but it was specific, and specific is everything. Between the ceiling lath and the floorboards of the attic above, Hostetler left a deliberate air gap of 3 inches, running the full length of the room. Not filled with anything, open. He then cut a narrow slot at each end of that gap, one facing the prevailing breeze side of the house and one facing away from it, both connecting to the attic space above. The gap became a channel. Air entered on one side, moved slowly through the space above the ceiling and below the attic floor, and exited the other side into the attic where the gable vents carried it out. He measured the surface temperature of the plaster ceiling at 2 in the afternoon on a 96-degree day. Then he measured the same ceiling in the neighbor's house built the conventional way, joists sitting directly on the ceiling lathe, with no gap, no channel, no movement. The neighbor's ceiling surface was 94 degrees. The Schrock ceiling was 83 degrees. 11 degrees of difference. Not from insulation, from a 3-inch layer of moving air doing what moving air does, carrying heat away before it can conduct downward into the room. Hostetler wrote in that same entry that the technique was not his invention. He said he had seen it first in a house built in the 1860s near Millersburg that he was called in to repair, and the old carpenter who had built it was long dead. He did not know where that man had learned it. He suspected it came from German or Swiss builders who settled that part of Ohio in the 1840s and 1850s and brought their building knowledge with them the same way they brought everything else, in their heads, because it could not be taxed or confiscated or lost at sea. That technique has a name in old building literature. Some texts call it a ventilated ceiling cavity. Some call it a breathing ceiling. In German building traditions going back to the 1700s, it appears in farmhouse construction manuals as a standard detail in any room that sat directly below a roof, not an innovation. A baseline assumption. Of course you left an air channel. Of course you connected it to the outside. Of course the ceiling breathed. The idea that you would seal a ceiling tight against a superheated roof assembly with no provision for that heat to escape would have struck those builders as not just wrong, but incomprehensible. Now your house does not have this. Almost no house built after 1955 has this. But you can create a version of it without tearing your ceiling down, and this is what I want to leave you with. If you have an attic above a finished room and that room is unbearable in summer, go up into the attic on a cool morning. Look at the insulation on the attic floor between the joists. In most houses built after 1970, that insulation is either blown in cellulose or fiberglass batts, packed flush to the top of the joist. Flush means sealed. There is no air movement between the top of your ceiling drywall and the bottom of that insulation. The heat conducting through your roof deck loads directly into the insulation and then directly into your ceiling with no interruption. What Hostetler's air channel did was put movement between the heat source and the living space. You can approximate that by pulling the insulation back 2 inches from the eaves on both sides of the attic and ensuring your soffit vents are completely clear. This creates a low entry point for air. Then confirm your ridge vent or gable vents at the top are unobstructed. What you have now is a path. Cool air enters at the soffit, travels upward along the underside of the roof deck, picks up heat as it moves, and exits at the ridge or gable. The roof deck sheds its heat into that moving air instead of conducting it downward into your ceiling. It is not identical to Hostetler's 3-inch ceiling channel, but it is the same principle applied with what you already have. The heat needs somewhere to go that is not your bedroom. Give it a path upward and out, and it will take that path every time, because that is what heat does when you stop blocking it. The last thing I want to say is this. None of what I have described in these 2 parts is new knowledge. It is old knowledge. It is knowledge that was designed into houses for 150 years before anyone tried to sell you a solution to the problem that bad building created. The men who figured this out were not engineers with instruments and laboratories. They were carpenters who had to live in the houses they built, and whose families had to sleep in the upstairs bedrooms in August. That accountability produced wisdom. When the accountability disappeared, when builders moved on to the next project, and you were left alone with your overheating house and your power bill, the wisdom went with it. You are not helpless here. The physics has not changed. Heat still rises. Air still moves from high pressure to low. A 3-inch gap with a clear path to the outside still works exactly the way it worked for the Schrock family outside Shreve, Ohio, in the summer of 1934. Go find your gable vents this weekend. Clear them. Then come back and tell me what your upstairs felt like the following morning. That is the only assignment. 1 weekend. tell me what you found.